The Engineer and the Dwarfs, Part 5. German folk tale. "We shall never be able to marry," said Nora, now in the depths of despair. "Our house will have to be given up, and our things sold by auction, and I shall have to marry a horrid, rich old peasant who will treat me as a servant, and father will be obliged to work in the fields." With this she burst into tears. It was quite dark now save for the new moon whose pale crescent shone in the sky. Nora observed it in spite of her tears. "The new moon," she exclaimed, "oh do let us turn all the money that we have in our pockets." "How much have you got, Carl?" "About 10 shillings, he replied. "Oh, you are richer than I am. I have only 8d. in my purse. Nevertheless let us turn what we have, and it will be sure to bring us a fortune." Carl laughed. "You little fairy," he said, and looked at her with admiration. Then involuntarily his eyes strayed in the direction of the fir grove. He thought he could see something moving there. Nora looked too. "Carl," she said excitedly, "I do believe it is the dwarfman after all. Who else could it be?" At the same moment they caught sight of a queer form with a turned-up nose and peaked cap clearly outlined against the sky, and recognized Mr. Query. "Hello," said Carl. "Text missing in original, to you," he said in a droll manner. "Now, Mr. Dwarf," said Carl, anxious to proceed to business, "what about our little agreement as to electric light, etc.? "The committee has decided against it," said Mr. Query emphatically. "What do we want with your newfangled inventions? You would bring your workmen with you, they would discover our treasures, and turn the whole place into a mine, and of course we should be obliged to decamp." "Well, there is something in what you say," said Carl, to whom this idea had already occurred, "but we could avoid that catastrophe. As for you," continued the dwarf turning to Nora, "we have discovered that you are a human being also, and no fairy, therefore we shall not require your services any longer." "What a horrid way to give me notice, as if I could help not being a fairy," said poor Nora, weeping bitterly. The little fellow was much distressed, he could not make out what was the matter with her. "Don't cry, little Fr. Lincoln," he said, "I am sure we never thought you were so fond of us as all that. It is very gratifying, but it is too late now to alter our decision. The way down into our kingdom is sealed forever." "I could soon open it again," said Carl wrathfully. "As for that, it would not be quite such an easy matter as you think," said Mr. Query mockingly. "However, we are willing to offer you terms," he continued, "if you will leave us alone and protect our secrets." "What terms?" said Carl and Nora eagerly. "You shall see," said the dwarf, "follow me to the fir trees." So saying he sprang down from the stone on which he had been sitting and came up and shook hands with them. "We are going to be married, what do you think of that?" they informed him. "Humphrey! Your taste, not mine," said Mr. Query. "However, Nora will be able to clean your gold and silver dishes capitally, that's a comfort for you." "We haven't got any gold and silver dishes to clean, alas," said Nora. "Poor things," said Mr. Query. "Well, we'll see." He proceeded to the fir trees where the gentlemen of the committee were again assembled, standing in a solemn semicircle. "If you will sign this contract, we are willing to give you a reward." "I speak in the name of the gentlemen of the committee," said Mr. Query, and the little men nodded their heads in assent. He drew out a roll of parchment from a bag he carried with him and handed it to Carl. Nora looked over his shoulder. On the parchment was written the following: "We, Carl Hammerstein, Nora O'Brien, pledge our solemn oath Christmas tree, that we will not attempt to visit Dwarfland again, or molest the dwarfs in any way, by offering them modern inventions for which they have no use, etc., etc., or by revealing their secret chambers to the glaring light of day. Signed." "We are willing enough to sign," said Carl, "but what are your terms, old man? We want to know that first. You offered us a bribe, you know." "All in good time," said Mr. Query. "Gentlemen of the committee, display the treasure." The dwarf men formed themselves into a ring, in the center of which Nora and Carl could see masses of what looked like solid gold. "You may take as much of this as you like," they said, "and we warrant you on our solemn word of honor Christmas tree that it is pure, unalloyed gold." "We'll sign anything you like, dear little men," said Nora, joyfully, and I invite you all to my wedding. 3 weeks from today, said Carl. But Nora was too excited to notice what he was saying. I shall always believe in the new moon, she repeated again and again. How shall we carry it? She exclaimed suddenly. I have not even got a basket with me. My men shall trundle it along for you in wheelbarrows, said Mr. Query. No, please, do not say thank you. I have a great objection to being thanked. Carl and Nora now signed the document with joyful hearts. Nora professed herself very sorry not to see her dwarf friends again. She had a real affection for the droll little men. You may come across us sometime again, who knows, said Mr. Query. We make excursions into your world from time to time. It is improbable but not impossible that we may meet again. Goodbye. A brilliant flash as of lightning shot from under the ground, the earth trembled and shook. Nora clung to Carl in terror, for she thought that the earth would swallow them up too. Then Mr. Query and the dwarfs disappeared underground, calling out as they did so, you see we have our lift and our electric light too, Mr. Engineer, ha! Ha! Exclamation mark. We are not quite so behind the times as you thought us, ha! Ha! Nora and Carl stood still in speechless astonishment, then they looked anxiously for their gold, fearing that the dwarfs might have played them a trick after all. But no, there were two jolly strong-looking little fellows with wheelbarrows. We've got the gold all right, they said. Don't you be afraid, we've put some dirty old potatoes at the top, they continued with a cunning expression on their faces. Just in case we meet anyone on the way, you know we should have to hop, skip and jump 1, 2, 3 and off, and it might look awkward for you. I am sure it's very kind of you, said Nora, and we can never thank you enough, and off they all set down the mountain. It was a troublesome job to get the heavy wheelbarrow over the stream. Nora declared afterwards that some of the gold was lost there, but they found no trace of it again. If it were so, they did not feel safe until they reached the gate of Hotel Fancy. Shall we put it in the backyard or in the stable? Said the little fellows in a hoarse whisper. Put it in the corner of the stable, said Nora, as we have not got a horse no one goes in there. We will manage the rest, thank you so much. Please don't thank us, said the little men, dwarfs are not used to that, and it hurts their feelings. Well, here is something for your labors, said Carl, and he gave the little men a handful of silver. They turned it over and seemed to regard it as a great curiosity. Then they heard a movement in the house, and quick as lightning they were off before Carl and Nora could say goodbye. Mr. O'Brien was pacing up and down in a great state of agitation. It was nearly midnight and he feared they might have met with an accident. There's no depending on the fairies, he said to himself, and dwarfs are said to be treacherous, so you see he knew something of what Nora was up to. His joy was the greater when Nora and Carl rushed in and dragging him to the stable showed him the pile of gold. I'll be for taking it to the bank at once, he said, you never know but what it may melt away, or turn into a heap of leaves. I've read stories like that. Our wedding shall be next week, said Carl, joyfully. And aren't you going to give me any time to get my trousseau? Said Nora with a dancing light in her eyes that made her look more enchanting than ever. Sure, and I'll be wanting the finest trousseau that ever a princess had. We'll turn Hotel Fancy into a palace, said Mr. O'Brien. The wedding was celebrated 3 weeks from this date, as they had agreed. Nora wore an exquisitely soft cream silk gown, embroidered with real gold. It was said that the embroidery was a present from the dwarfs. Certain it is too that she wore an old pearl necklace of such marvelous workmanship that the like was never seen before. The tale was whispered that a little deformed man had been seen to slip a parcel containing the necklace into the letterbox. Nora's relations came over from Ireland to be present at the wedding, and you may be sure that Carl's mother arrived too, all the way from Pomerania to share the festivities and the cake. Hotel Fancy was crammed with guests, every available room was occupied. There was some talk already of enlarging the house. One of the presents that the bride had from her husband, was a looking glass, set with precious stones. People thought that it was a curious wedding present, and wondered if Nora were exceptionally vain, but Carl declared that if it had not been for a looking glass he might never have known his wife, a remark which sounded more mysterious than ever. Many conjectures were made concerning it, but none of them were half so strange as the truth. Another present was a brooch set in diamonds in the shape of a crescent moon. As they were now wealthy, Carl was able to indulge his passion for mechanical inventions, and Hotel Fancy was full of the most delightful surprises, fountains in unexpected places in the spray of which little balls danced up and down, a rare gramophone that played the most soft and pleasant music, every variety of electric light and so on. Nora was a little disappointed that her friends the dwarfs did not come to the wedding, but what could she expect if her mother-in-law and uncles and aunts and cousins were all asked as well? Could she expect that the dignified Mr. Query would condescend to become an object of general curiosity? I have heard that the little men called and left their cards some days after the wedding, when Nora and Carl were away on their honeymoon, and that Mr. O'Brien treated them as royal visitors, and that they left charmed with his hospitality, and astounded at the many entertaining and marvelous things that were to be seen in Hotel Fancy. The end.